So, welcome everybody. For the next session, we would like to discuss about a new generational contract. And to briefly start, before we begin, I would like to tell you something what new generational contract means in general. So, in the end, the new generational contract captures the principle of the mutual dependence of different generations on each other, and to provide mutual support across generations at different stages of their life. So, implicitly defining, we would like to ask the question, what generations maybe owe each other? And then in light of demographic changes, environmental challenges, or even increasing debt levels, there's the question regarding generational contract on the underlying basis. Is the intergenerational fairness challenged in the next few years? And we would like to ask the question, how can decision makers moderate the dialogue between generations and promote intergenerational fairness in areas such as sustainability, health, education, and fiscal policy? And therefore, we would like to introduce our panel. So first of all, we'd like to introduce the chairman of the Christian Democratic Union. It's the largest political party of the opposition in the German parliament, the Bundestag, Mr. Friedrich Merz. Then the co-president of the Club of Rome, Mampela Rampele. The State Secretary of Youth of the Republic of Austria, Claudia Parkholm. And the Associate Professor for Political Science at the University of St. Gallen, Professor Christoph Frey. Thank you for being here.
There we go. From geopolitical tensions and conflicts, on we go. There is other issues out there, and we have to, and we want to address those other issues as well. The notion of a contract among generations builds on the fact that generations have something to give and something to take. Generations actually do depend on each other to provide mutual support across different stages of their lives. What is it then that generations owe each other? At this time, conventional ideas of intergenerational fairness and equity are being questioned. And they do need to be reviewed in light of demographic change, unprecedented debt levels, and multiple environmental challenges. Against this backdrop, decision makers in politics obviously are called upon to engage in dialogue between the generations. And in fact, yes, politicians usually do engage in dialogue. Then again, words come easy, and rarely are words being followed by deeds, by decisions that really challenge existing privileges and readjust priorities in order to actually reshape intergenerational equity for the 21st century. So much for friendly banter. How do we break inertia? How do we break through management by procrastination? How can we get things going? With a view to exploring such ideas, I am delighted to welcome and to present a cross-generational panel worthy of the name. When Claudia Parkholm was elected to Austria's National Council Parliament in 2017, she was barely 22 years old. Today, Claudia is holding office in Austria's government. She serves as State Secretary for Youth, the Federal Chancellery. She's also chairwoman of the Young ÖVP, which is a mainstream political party in Austria. Friedrich Merz is currently serving as a member of the German Bundestag, also a parliament, Germany. There he is the leader of the CDU parliamentary group. What is more, let it also be said that Friedrich Merz is a board member of United Europe. And I take the liberty of passing along that information as United Europe is today co-hosting this panel discussion. We're glad and thankful for having you guys here. So, United Europe, and this is the information that I need to and I want to pass along here, is an association that creates and enhances cross-border exchange on industry topics to strengthen European competitiveness and diversity. Friedrich Merz, thank you so much for joining us online. Last, but certainly not least, Dr. Mampele Rampele is co-president of the Club of Rome. She's an activist. She's a medical doctor. She's an academic. And again, last not least, she's a businesswoman in her own right and a political thought leader. Right, opening question to all the three of you. And we'll start with you, Dr. Rampele. Same question will go to all three panelists. Where do you currently see the greatest challenge with a view to intergenerational equity and fairness? Dr. Rampele.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. I would like to start by quoting a fellow Club of Rome member, Roman, in his book, A Good Ancestor. He identifies what he calls the pathology of short-termism as the greatest threat to the ability of humanity to lead with the next generations in mind. And this short-termism is displayed fully in the way in which we as citizens overconsume with little regard for next generations, but also how politicians, with their eyes on polls and the next election, make choices they know are not good for next generations. The same thing with business, with the eye on the share price and quarterly results, make decisions that are clearly not in the interest of the future. And this has led one of the greatest thinkers who's left us, but is a good ancestor, Mary Catherine Bateson, to say that although human beings are living longer, we continue to think in the short term. So why is this such a problem for us as the human race? Indigenous wisdom that is still embraced by many in the world embodies the privileging of intergenerational core responsibilities as the core elements of philosophies like Ubuntu and equivalence as a value system. Women in particular are entrusted with keeping the seed because they can be trusted not to consume the seed, and we're talking about both the human and other seeds in nature. And so reverence for life and reverence for nature drives everyday lives for people with this value system. This reverence for life gets passed on from one generation to the other. So humanity is being challenged as we sit with multiple planetary emergencies because we have lost this wisdom. So what are we to do to go back to thinking in the long term? It really has to do with willingness to change our mindsets. And that's not impossible because we are all born with an innate capacity, which is infinite, for learning how to be human in a new way that pays due reverence to life. And when you do that, your time frames change from the short to the long term. Thank you.
Ooh. Dr. Rampele, that was beautiful. We'll afterwards have to address the minor detail of how we do change mindsets. But let us go on first, Friedrich Merz, if I may address you, and repeat that question. Where do you currently see the greatest challenge with a view to intergenerational equity?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that I'm really regretting not to be able to be present in St. Gallen this morning, but nevertheless, I'm happy to join this panel, at least this way. We are accustomed to over the last 2 years so much. So I hope it works, and I'm really happy to join this panel. And let me give some brief ideas how I think we could proceed on this issue. My first idea is, or my first point is that we are seeing actually the beginning of a new world order in terms of how this war in Ukraine changes our entire framework of doing politics in these years to come. And I may refer to the first panel, which happened this morning here. I think that we have really to be aware of the fact that this war is more than just a local event in the eastern part of Europe. It changes our complete political order in this world. And that means that the short period of time between 1990, the end of the division of Europe, and 2022, the beginning of this war, is over now. And we are seeing, or let me put it this way, we are at the threshold of a new global distribution of power, politically, militarily, and economically. There are two world powers on the earth who are already identified. The one is the United States of America, the other one is China. The open question is, where will Europe be positioned? Where will Africa be positioned? Where will the Indo-Pacific area be positioned? And where will Russia be positioned? The weakest player in this game at present politically is the European Union. And we are wondering in Europe where we could go to in terms of European unity and strength to provide our work to this new political order. And the internal problems of the European Union are so strong that this is also covering the generational question of the European Union and some specific member states, including the Federal Republic of Germany. And I fully agree with what Mampela Ramphela said at the very beginning. We are suffering, as she said, the pathology of short-term. And that is, in my view, the strongest problem. How can we overcome this issue now? I think that we are at the threshold of new priorities for our public budgets, including the European strategy of spending money from the public budget of the European Union. And if we are not willing to reduce consumption and to increase spendings and investments, then we will not be able to resolve the problem. This includes our pension systems. And I give you, at the end of my very brief introduction, one number. More than 1/4, almost 1/3 of our federal budget in Germany is spent every year to subsidize the pension system, the federal state pension system in Germany. And they strongly need that money. Without that money, they will not be able to pay the pensions for our elder people. And that is the reason why I'm focusing on the budget, I'm focusing on the spendings, and I'm asking for new priorities in our public budgets to be able to invest in the future of the younger generations. And this includes investments in infrastructure and investments in education. And that is what we are lacking here in Germany. And my observation is that we are really lacking these investments in many other parts of the European Union. But Germany is at present one of the countries which is confronted with really severe challenges in terms of how can we invest in our infrastructure and in our institutions of education. And that is something which is really concerning me. We are at the edge of new priorities in our public budgets.
Thank you, Friedrich Merz. Huge transfer from younger generations to the elder generations.
Yeah.
For example, in Germany, I may assure you at this point that we have exactly the same situation in Switzerland, whereby pension schemes would not work any longer if we did not transfer huge amounts of money on an annual basis from younger to elder generations. But let us go on and finish this intro with this general question. Claudia Blackholm, where do you currently see the greatest challenge when it comes to this issue of intergenerational equity?
So first of all, let me also start with a thank you for the warm welcome and the kind introduction here to the panel. I'm very pleased to discuss about intergenerational fairness today with you. And I want to underline what Friedrich Merz just said. It's not just a challenge in Germany or in Switzerland. We also have this big challenge in Austria and in many other European countries and also worldwide. Ensuring intergenerational fairness poses lots of challenges for many governments all over the world. And one of our most pressing issues in our welfare state is to create a sustainable and fair pension system. And let me give you just one example from Austria. In the 1970s, the average Austrian was retired for 8 years. And nowadays, the average Austrian is retired for 22 years. And that's their own life stage. And that brings many, many challenges, not just financial natures, also concerning topics like age loneliness, workforce. Also, the demographic development is a big issue. And that shows us that there is no one-size-fits-all solution for intergenerational fairness. We have to work on many fronts and look for many solutions and approaches to solve this problem. And maybe one another aspect is that current times confronts a key narrative which is long underpinned in society, the key narrative that each successive generation would become better off than the generation before. And in past, we had or we have implicit contract and an implicit intergenerational agreement. which says that future societal needs must or should be met. And a few things changed since then. We have climate change as a big issue. We have worse conditions on our public budgets, like we talked about the pension system, for instance. Also the technological change, and that shows us that we have to put the young generation in the center of this discussion, and also to talk more open about intergenerational fairness, and that's also a way to empower the young generation, and that's something that I see as my job as well. But all generations of politicians and businessmen and women, to empower young people to take part at this decision, and also at the discussions and debates.
And you are sitting at the levels of power to do things. So we'll get back to Claudia, what you're actually doing out there when it comes to Austria. But before we do so, Dr. Ambele, I would like to confront you with something Friedrich Merz said in his intro. And while he was saying it, I could not help thinking about how does that resonate with you? And that sentence was, but of course, the war in Ukraine changes everything. Now, I wonder how that resonates with you, because you're not usually sitting in Europe. You're not looking at this war from where you are. And to bring us back into today's topic here, intergenerational equity, after all, on the African continent, demographics are slightly different from what we see in Europe. So, young people do make up obviously more than half of societies. In Nigeria, for example, the median age at this point is 18 years, whereas we are somewhere, hovering about 45 years. So the intergenerational issue must be a different one in African societies. Could you elaborate on that?
First, on the war in Ukraine, there is a saying in African culture that when the elephants fight, the grass suffers. We are the grass. So we are as affected as those close to the war as we did during the Cold War. And so this is a global challenge. Africa cannot stand outside of it. But I also would like to quote the wisdom of one of our good ancestors, Desmond Tutu. There cannot be neutrality when an elephant is standing on the tail of a mouse. And so we have to address this as a matter of global equity. The issue of intergenerational fairness and equity is embedded in the very philosophy of Ubuntu. African culture embodies this even in the naming of children. Children are named to connect them to their ancestors and those who are yet to be born. And so the names are not just a matter of identity, they are hopes. They embrace the hopes and generations past. Now, coming back to the issue of demographics, yes, Africa is blessed with one of the youngest population profiles, if not the youngest population profile. But Africa is also cursed with the oldest median age of its leadership. Mm-hmm. And this mismatch doesn't work. And this is in an earthquake, there's always the aftershock. This is the aftershock of colonial conquest that saw people who are now in leadership positions in Africa as freedom fighters. Now, once the freedom was achieved, instead of stepping back like good ancestors, they are stuck. and we are stuck with them. And so for us on the continent, the challenge is how to relearn the wisdom of intergenerational shifts in leadership. That the elders are respected not because they are running affairs, but they are respected for having stepped aside so that the young people can bring the wisdom and the creativity that's needed by each new challenging era. Yesterday, we had the beauty of listening to the former Minister of Trade and Industry from Botswana, Boholo, who described just the value, like Claudia, of bringing young people into governance. She transformed Botswana's registration of businesses from 49 days to less than 7 days. Why? Using digital technology. Why? Because she's not afraid of change. That's the beauty of being young. The ability to explore the unexplored. But we also heard yesterday from President Cassis, who challenged the young people to say, don't wait for my generation, that was also part of the freedom fighting generation, to do things to prepare for your future. No. You are the change makers you're waiting for. You are the ones who have to seize the moment. And as Frantz Fanon, who was an Algerian psychiatrist, said in the 60s, that each generation must find its mission and live it so that they can free the future. And so my plea to the young people in this room and elsewhere on the globe, but particularly on the African continent, is to repeat what President Cassis said. We need a revolution, not a bloody revolution, a human revolution, a revolution of mindsets, so that we can see the benefits of the wisdom of interconnectedness and interdependence, where each generation lives its responsibilities with the eye on enabling future generations to do the same. So we are in this together.
Dr. Ampele. I'm the moderator, I'm probably not supposed to applaud. But since you bring up the mindset again, is it school, is it training, is it education? Where do we start changing mindset? How do we go about changing mindset?
The beauty of mindset change is that you don't need a school. It's a question of having conversations in safe spaces, wherever you are. It starts with you wanting to challenge yourself. And in my family, we need to sit, and dinner time is a wonderful time for these conversations to help the next generations understand the challenges and how they can start thinking about the choices they have to make. But we also have communities, which is why we have a mismatch between the global institutional architecture and the realities, day-to-day realities of people's lives. And we at the Club of Rome are proposing and championing that the only way we can emerge as a human community from these multiple planetary emergencies is to be willing to learn anew, to learn how to be human again, how to acknowledge our interconnectedness, how to honor our interdependence. And those conversations should be taking place in every community, in every business, in every government, cabinet, in every parliament, so that we always test the decisions we make against is this really a good decision to make if we are thinking about 2 generations from where we are sitting?
Claudia, while you prepare on, telling us about your record in government, let us go back to you, Friedrich Merz, and to more mundane issues, such as the one that you emphasize and have been emphasizing for a long time, and that is budgetary responsibility, financial sustainability. For you, the issue of intergenerational equity has a lot to do with how much we earn in terms of revenues and how much we spend. Now, at the same time, obviously, in light of climate change, in light of so many concerns that weigh heavily also on young people's mind and heart, if I may say, do you stick to that precept of financial austerity? You do know that, for example, Jean-Luc Mélenchon in France prepares to stage a revolution in terms of budgetary restraint because he tells us that the Germans are stupid in that regard and that we should do much more and not think of austerity all the time, but do something. So, Friedrich Merz, do you stick to what you say or do you actually go along with Jean-Luc Mélenchon?
So, many thanks for this open question. And my short answer is, yes, I stick to that, what I said, but this is not austerity. This is, in my view, fiscal discipline to have enough room for spendings on investments and on education. And the problem is that the over-indebtedness of many public households has gone so far that our room for maneuvers is very small. And so my plea is, or my idea is, that we could come back to what has helped us in the past and which will help us in the future as well, to spend the money, including deficits, but to focus on new priorities. You might have heard that we in Germany had an address to the German parliament by our chancellor, and he created the world of Zeitenwende. Now, what does that mean? If we take that seriously, Zeitenwende means that we have to change almost everything within our priorities. And that is my point. To set up new priorities means that we have things or ideas or projects which are extremely important. And that is, of course, defense, but that will be, of course, and remain education, infrastructure, investments, but that behind that, we find consumption and subsidizing our pension system. So that is what I mean, and that is not austerity. That is just fiscal discipline to create enough room for spending on new priorities. And that's my point. And I find that is not politics of austerity. This is the right opposite of that. This is the politics of being able to invest. And that is what I'm feeling, actually, and that is what we have to do in most European member states, including Germany, Austria, and others.
Mm-hmm. All right, Claudia, your 5 minutes to shine in terms of what you're doing. But if I may, beyond what you are doing, do tell us also about what should be done in order to make this intergenerational, dialogue, to get into a dialogue, to actually really engage in a dialogue. So what are you doing, or what have you done? Thank you so much, but also what should be done?
Well, I think we have the big problem that the youth doesn't have the weight like the other generations compared to the elder ones. Since we know the demographic development over the last decades, and I think this will further on the next years and decades. So we have the big challenge to give the young generation a strong voice also in decision making and to put them on the table where decisions and where politics are made. And in Austria, we are some kind of front runner. I'm very proud of that. Since we implemented the voting age at 16, 15 years ago. So we are just 1 out of 2 European countries. The other one is Malta. They implemented in 2017, where it is allowed to vote at the age of 16. And that had a big effect and impact on politics, because now politicians focus more on the young generation. They put youth politics in their programs. Because they expect votes in return from the younger generation. And that's one very important point. And we also implemented a youth checks on the legislation process. So when there is a law which should be made, we consider the impact on the young generation before that. So what does a special law have consequences on children and young people in Austria? Concerning financial issues, concerning environmental issues. And I think that's a big step, and I expect that also to happen at a European level or at many national levels, and we are working on that. And since we are talking about intergenerational issues, I also see many challenges because of the last 2 years, because of the corona pandemic situation. There were many lockdowns, distance learning, home office for the young generation, for their parents. And that also brought, well, some problems that are now highlighted more, since we somehow are in a better situation now with Corona, concerning mental health of the younger generation. 2 years ago, in spring 2020, we all concentrated at risk groups and how to save them from getting ill, we saved them from getting an infection with Corona. And now we have to focus also on the young generation, how they suffered because of lockdowns, because of being at home and not going out. I never thought that it could be a political debate about curfews or how long the young generation is allowed to go out. And now we have to fight for these things more again. And that's also a thing of intergenerational collaboration. So if you ask what should be done and what could be done, I think that's also a good point when we consider the motto of the symposium, collaborative advantage. I think we also have a collaborative advantage if we put all generations on the table where decisions are made, and if we collaborate among the generations, the elder ones with the younger ones. We don't have to, and we should not divide the generations, like some journalists always want to have a fight among the generations. We should collaborate, and that's important.
All right, well, thank you. Before we open up for some Q&A, well done, Claudia, well done. Before we open up to some Q&A, Friedrich Merz, with you as, you know, you are a leader already, with you as a political leader, would we see aging vote in Germany coming down to 16? Is that something you would fancy?
Well, this is part of the political program of the German government, but this will be negotiated within a broader framework of our election system, which has to be changed fundamentally because the Court of Constitution made a decision which urges us to reform our election system more or less completely. And that is the reason why I cannot give you an answer yet, because this is part of a bigger package, in which we have to change our election system for the next federal elections. And I very much hope that we will be able to do that in the course of this year, because we are running out of time, and we should do that as fast as possible. And the age of 16 is part of it, but yet not yet decided.
All right, thank you. Q&A, please do stand up and do give us your name prior to giving us your question, please.
Hi, I'm Laura. I'm a university student from Germany. And so my question is for Mr. Merz. We've just heard from you, Ms. Placam, that, I mean, there are so many reasons to give the younger generation a much stronger voice than it has as of now. And I think that, I mean, Mr. Merz, you have been pretty skeptical about lowering the voting age in Germany, as has your party. So please elaborate, like, what is your skepticism? Like, what are your reasons for not lowering the voting age in Germany?
Friedrich Merz.
Well, there is no skepticism on my side. There is just the question, will we be able to reform our election system so that we are bringing down the numbers of parliamentarians, which we actually have, the number 736. We are beyond the Chinese parliament, one of the biggest parliaments in the world, so we have to reduce the numbers of members, and then we will debate the election age in Germany. And I'm really open for any arguments in favor and against that we are coming to a good result on this. So I'm not skeptical, I'm just open in my mind how to deal with that question. And I tell you, I'm really open to hear good arguments.
Mm-hmm. It's hard. Please, I do see hands raised.
Thank you. So hello, my name is Sophie. I'm also from the University of St. Gallen, and thank you for the interesting panel. So we've just discussed about the generations are very dependent of each other, but I think countries are also very dependent of each other. So we all know the buzzword globalization. So now the question, I know that everyone has a independent pension system, etc., tax regulations, but yeah, what can we learn from each other? Also maybe at the European Union, how can we solve the problem together and not only by each country? We have 3 representatives today here from each country, and we all have the same problem. How can we solve the problem together and not only by generation view?
Thank you, Sophie. How can we learn from each other? Political scientists would probably say, like, how do we enhance policy diffusion, benchmarking and policy diffusion, best practice and so forth? Who would like to take the question?
I think the motto of the symposium is the best title for that. So I think we have to look up for best practice examples in other countries and implement them quicker in other countries, since especially concerning climate change, for instance. We have to focus more on renewable energies. We have to put our focus on new technologies, and we also have to not just set up our goals in Paris, we also have to fulfill them, quickly fulfill them. And I somehow see there is, well, some countries just like to watch and see what will happen and what other countries do. We have to do that together, and we have to collaborate on this if we want to have an advantage, like we watch our environmental and we make that our main advantage also concerning businesses, our companies, for instance. We don't have to see the 2 sides of a medal, like the one side are economics and the other side is the environment. We have to bring these sides together and put our efforts on how to collaborate more among the generations, but also collaborate among the countries, since we can find the best solutions together. And I think that could be a solution how to gain velocity in this discussion.
Can I add my voice to this? I think we need to be honest with ourselves. the globalization agenda has produced some goods, but the long-term impact of the globalization agenda has brought us to where we are. The fact that there are common problems around pensions, etc., raises a question about what kind of global economic system do we have? We have now an economic system that is so financialized that it's crazy that you have a financial system bigger than the assets that are possible. So what is the name of that thing? It's not economics, it's something else. And so I would like to plead that as we look at the various problems that are popping up, whether it's pension shortfalls, the undermining of democracy, let us also dare to ask the question, isn't this time, in this mindset change, in this conversation we should be having, that we look at what would relational economics look like? What would relational well-being look like? What would a healthy biosphere look like? And how do we, in our intergenerational conversations, make sure that whatever we come up with does not violate those absolute life-giving systems?
Mm-hmm. Dr. Rampele, the University of St. Gallen is the best place for you to say what you're saying. We have time for one more question. I see hands, but it's difficult to identify more than hands.
Thank you very... Hello, can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. My name is Simon. I'm here with the Leaders of Tomorrow, and I come from Germany. Now, my question builds up on the discussion on the reform of the election system in Germany, but I'm also very curious to hear the Austrian and Nigerian perspective on this. When we discuss the lowering of...
South African, not Nigerian.
Oh, there was a case of Nigeria mentioned.
No offense.
Apologies. We discussed the lowering of the voting age. Now it's in the discussion in Germany. My question regards the opportunities and possibilities we have to lower the age of our parliamentarians. And in that regard, I was curious about the case you mentioned of this huge imbalance we see in some countries, but in most countries we have a similar issue. Now you also mentioned the size of the German parliament is growing. So I would like to ask in specific about the proposal to limit the duration of time served on parliament to, for example, to two legislative periods. And I would like to hear the different perspectives on that. Thank you.
Yeah.
So perhaps we start with Friedrich Merz. Would you like to lower the time of your...
Yeah, well, I give you two observations. The one is that we already have very young parliamentarians in the German Bundestag now. I guess that this is the youngest Bundestag we ever had. And the duration of membership is roughly 12 years. So the average of the duration of membership in Germany is a little bit more than 2.5 decades. The limitation of the membership of our governments could be an issue. I would fully agree. But in Parliament, we in fact have already achieved the limitation of the membership duration. So this will not be an issue for our election system and our debate on the reform of our election system.
Mm-hmm. Claudia?
Well, when I think back, and I went to school 15 years ago, we also had big discussions in Austria when we implemented the voting age at 16. I remember an exam at school where we had to write pro and con about the voting age 16, and we had the luck that elections were before. I think we wouldn't be at this level, and we wouldn't have the voting age at 16 if we wouldn't have had elections in Austria at this time. So every party agreed somehow to give the youth this strong voice. And I think we have to work on that also to empower young people, like Friedrich Merz said. I'm no fan of quotas. And I think it's more important to give young people the chance and to mix up parliaments and governments, but also in businesses. We have to give them the strong voice, because I think it's crucial for a future-orientated policy to have them sitting on the table. And it's way more sustainable to empower young people than to implement quotas.
Discipline in terms of time, budget. Before I present the last question to Dr. Rampele, thank you, Friedrich Merz, for joining us today. Thank you for bringing tons of practical experience and more to this debate. Thank you so very much. Claudia Blackholm, thanks. Claudia Blackholm, thank you for bringing youth and experience to this debate. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Dr. Rampele, thank you for bringing Desmond Tutu. Thank you for bringing the wisdom of Stephen Biko to St. Gallen. Thank you for joining us today. And the last question goes to you. 50 years ago, a groundbreaking report by the Club of Rome was published and first discussed at the third St. Gallen Symposium, The Limits of Growth. This is 50 years, and on the occasion of this anniversary, the St. Gallen Symposium and the Club of Rome will once again join forces, I have been told. A new initiative is about to see the light of day. Dr. Rampele, what can you tell us about this joint initiative and ways for our audience to engage?
We at the Club of Rome are truly privileged to have been approached by St. Gallen to join them in exploring what could a new intergenerational contract look like. And this process of exploration starts with this very symposium. We are delighted to be able to bring the wisdom that we have garnered from this symposium to this process of exploration that we are embarking on. It is a result of having learned that simply sounding the alarm about the limits to growth did not lead to change. What will lead to change is what our founder, Aurelio Piché, asked us to do, which is to champion a human revolution. And this is a revolution of freeing our minds to dare to reimagine a future where there is global equity for a healthy biosphere. A future where young people like Claudia are not the exception, but the rule. A future where countries are not driven by short-termism and nationalism, but are driven by the need to promote relational well-being. Because one thing we have learned from COVID, it doesn't matter whether you're Switzerland or you are Malawi. It just simply knocks at the door. And so I see this as an enormously important opportunity. And we want to welcome members of business, members of other universities, and importantly, young people of the world who have to shape the future they would like to bequeath to their children's children. So this, for us as the Club of Rome, is the greatest privilege. Thank you.
Well, thank you.